I'm going to fix the timeline, logic issue that the original video's comments flagged, confronting the family before or after going to authorities. Give the betrayer a clearer motive as the comments asked for, and keep everything else structure, pacing, emotional beats the same. New protagonist, new industry, new setting, new names throughout. My name is Walter Grady. I am 68 years old, and I built a regional trucking and logistics company out of a single leased flatbed truck into one of the largest freight operations in the Midwest. I thought I had a family who respected what that cost me. My daughter gave me a gift for my retirement, a 2-week cruise through the Greek islands. "You've earned this, Dad," she told me, pressing the boarding documents into my hands at the terminal. But less than 10 minutes after her car pulled away from the curb, a woman I had never seen before grabbed my sleeve outside the cruise terminal, her eyes wide with something close to panic. "Sir, don't board that ship," she whispered. "I work the front desk at the marina office. I just overheard your son-in-law on a call, and if you get on that boat, you are never getting your company back." I stood frozen on the pier, and what she told me next unraveled everything I thought I understood about my own family. If you're watching this, stay with me, because the betrayal I uncovered over the following 3 weeks will make you look differently at the people closest to you. Please hit like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. The port of Miami was loud that morning. Gulls screaming over the container cranes, families dragging suitcases toward the gangway, the smell of diesel and salt water thick in the air. I remember thinking it was exactly the kind of morning that should have felt like a beginning. At 68, after 41 years of building Grady Freight Solutions from a single truck route between Cleveland and Pittsburgh into a fleet of over 300 trucks spanning 9 states, I was finally doing what my cardiologist, my accountant, and everyone who loved me had been begging me to do for the last 5 years. I was stepping back. I had missed my share of birthdays and anniversaries chasing contracts. I had slept in my truck cab more nights than I could count in the early years, just so my late wife and our daughter would never have to know what it felt like to go without. And now, finally, I was handing the company to the man who had married into our family 12 years earlier, my son-in-law, Derek Voss, and to my daughter, Chloe, who sat on the board alongside him. Derek stood beside me on the pier that morning, looking every bit the part. Crisp linen shirt, sunglasses pushed up into his hair, the kind of easy confidence that had once made me proud to call him family. He checked the sleek silver watch I'd given him the day he made partner. Then he handed me a leather travel wallet stuffed with cruise documents, transfer vouchers, and a handwritten note from Chloe telling me to relax and stop checking my phone. 2 weeks completely unplugged, Walter," Derek said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "No dispatch calls, no fuel contracts, no driver complaints. Just you, the Aegean, and some peace and quiet. You built this company from nothing. Let us handle it for a while." I remember feeling something settle in my chest, a kind of pride I hadn't let myself feel in years. I had raised, or at least helped raise through marriage, a man capable enough to run what I'd spent my whole life building. I told him I trusted him completely, and I meant it. We shook hands, and then, because that felt insufficient after 12 years, we embraced right there on the dock. I watched Chloe's car pull away in the rearview reflection of a parked shuttle bus, already missing her, already telling myself 3 weeks would go by fast. That's when the woman grabbed my arm. She said her name was Priscilla, and she worked the reception desk at the marina office 2 piers down. She told me she'd been on a smoke break behind the building when she overheard a man on the phone, pacing near the loading dock, talking too loud, the way people do when they think no one is listening. She said he mentioned my name. He mentioned the word trust, and then he mentioned something about my banking credentials being locked before I was even out of U.S. waters. She said the man had described in detail what a passenger on the ship I was about to board looked like, down to the gray suit jacket I was wearing that morning. "I don't know you, and this isn't my business," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder, "but nobody deserves to walk into something like that blind. Please, sir, just don't get on that ship yet." I want to tell you I laughed it off. Part of me wanted to. But 41 years of reading people across a negotiating table had taught me that panic like hers is very hard to fake convincingly. I thanked her, and I told her I needed a moment, and I stepped away from the boarding line toward a bench near the parking structure, my heart hammering harder than it had in years. I called Chloe first. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I told myself she was probably still in traffic. Phone in her bag, nothing more. Then I called Derek. He picked up on the second ring, his voice warm and easy, asking if I'd already found the buffet. I told him, casually, that I'd gotten a strange call from someone at the bank about a possible glitch on the corporate accounts, and I wanted to make sure nothing was wrong before I lost cell service for 2 weeks. There was a pause. Not long. A refraction of a second, the kind most people would never register. But I have spent 4 decades in rooms where a half-second hesitation before a number gets named can mean the difference between a fair deal and a disaster. And I heard it clear as a bell. "Everything's fine, Walter," Derek said, a beat too smoothly. "You know how banks are. Always some automated flag on large accounts. I'll look into it. You should be boarding. Enjoy yourself." I told him I would. Then I hung up, and I did not board that ship. Instead, I found a quiet corner near a maintenance stairwell, and I called my accountant, Marion Petrelli, a woman who had done my company's books for 19 years before Derek eased her into early retirement 18 months ago, with what he called a very generous package. I hadn't spoken to her since her going-away lunch. She picked up, sounding surprised to hear from me, and when I told her what had happened on the pier, her voice changed entirely. "Walter," she said carefully, "I need you to listen to me. When they moved me out, I noticed some things in the transition that never sat right. I didn't say anything because I told myself it wasn't my place anymore. I think I was wrong." She told me about a series of new lines of credit opened against the company's fleet assets over the past year, all authorized under Derek's signature, all routed through an intermediary financial firm she'd never heard of before. She told me about a quiet increase in Derek's personal draw from company funds. She told me, gently, that she thought I should look very closely at my own retirement accounts before I did anything else, because during the transition, she'd heard whispers about paperwork being prepared that she was never shown. I did not sleep that night in the motel room 3 miles from the port where I checked in under a name that wasn't mine, using cash I'd pulled from an ATM before whatever was coming could freeze it. I lay on a mattress that squeaked every time I shifted my weight, staring at a water stain on the ceiling shaped roughly like the state of Ohio, and I tried to piece together how the son-in-law I had walked down the aisle with my daughter, the man I had taught to read a balance sheet, could possibly be doing this to me. By morning, I had my answer, or at least the beginning of one. My retirement trust, the one I had built over 4 decades, the one meant to be untouchable, was frozen under what the bank's automated portal vaguely called a pending legal review. My personal line of credit had been suspended, and a company email, forwarded to me by Marion from a contact who still worked in HR, announced to all senior staff that I had voluntarily stepped down from all operational and fiduciary roles effective immediately, in accordance with a signed transition agreement, a document I had never signed, never seen, and never agreed to. I sat in that motel room and understood, for the first time in my life, what it felt like to be entirely alone. I could not go to the board, because Derek had spent the last 2 years quietly replacing half of it with people who owed their positions to him. I could not go to the company's legal counsel, because that attorney had been hired 11 months ago on Derek's recommendation. I could not even fully trust my own daughter, because I did not yet know how much she knew, or whether the voice hesitating on that call had been a warning to me, or a rehearsal for a story she and Derek intended to tell everyone else. I needed someone who understood the deep financial architecture of my company and who had absolutely nothing to gain from lying to me. I needed Marion. She met me 2 days later at that same motel, carrying a banker's box of records she'd apparently kept copies of long after her official departure, the kind of quiet insurance a careful person keeps without ever expecting to need it. For 6 hours we sat on that squeaking mattress and the cheap desk chair, spreading documents across the bedspread, and what emerged was worse than either of us had feared. Derek had not simply mismanaged the company. Over 18 months, he had systematically leveraged nearly every major asset Grady Freight Solutions owned: our trucks, our terminals, even the land under our main Cleveland depot, against a series of increasingly reckless loans. Some of the money, Marion believed, had gone into a chain of failed real estate ventures under a shell company with Derek's name nowhere on the paperwork, but a significant portion, tens of millions of dollars, had simply vanished into accounts overseas that neither of us could trace without help we didn't yet have. "He's not just stealing from you, Walter," Marion said quietly, taking off her glasses and rubbing her eyes. "He's structured this so that when it collapses, and it will collapse, it collapses onto your name. Your signature is on documents you never signed. If this comes out the way it's built to come out, you are the one who goes to prison for it, not him." I sat with that for a long time. I thought about the exhaustion in my hands, the same hands that had loaded freight at 4 in the morning for years before I could afford to hire my first driver, and I felt something in me that had nothing to do with grief anymore. The heartbreak of realizing my own daughter's husband had done this to me, had perhaps even convinced my daughter to help him do it, gave way to something colder and steadier. This was not a family disagreement anymore. This was a calculated attempt to destroy everything I had built and hand me the blame for its destruction. I decided, sitting in that dim motel room, that I was not going to let that happen. What Marion and I still didn't know was why. Derek had married into money. He had a career, a reputation, a family. It didn't add up until Marion, digging through the shell company's filings 2 nights later, found a name buried in a footnote, a private lending group with a reputation, in certain circles, for financing people who couldn't get money anywhere legitimate. She made a few careful calls to contacts who still owed her favors, and the picture that came back turned my stomach. Derek had been gambling, badly, for years. First quietly at casinos 2 states over where no one would recognize him, and eventually online, in rooms that didn't ask questions about where the money came from as long as it kept arriving. He owed people who did not send polite collection letters. He owed people who had, according to one rattled contact, given him a very specific and very final deadline. He hadn't set out to destroy my company out of greed alone. He had set out to save himself, and he had decided my life's work was an acceptable price to pay for his. I want to be honest with you about what happened next, because I know it will sound strange, and because I've read enough comments under stories like this one to know people notice when the order of things doesn't make sense. So, let me be precise. I did not confront Derek and Chloe first. I went to the authorities first, and only after federal investigators had already begun quietly building their own case did I walk back into my own house. It took Marion and me 4 days to compile everything into something a federal agency could actually use. Bank records, the shell company filings, the gambling debt trail, time-stamped copies of the fraudulent transition agreement. On the 5th day, we drove 2 hours to the regional office of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division and asked for someone who handled corporate fraud. I remember the agent who finally sat down with us, a serious, unhurried woman named Special Agent Renata Cho, looking through the first folder for almost 10 full minutes without saying a word. "Mr. Grady," she finally said, "if even half of what's in here holds up, this is one of the more brazen fraud cases I've seen in this office in years. But I need you to understand something. If we move too fast, if you confront these people before we've secured the offshore transfer records, everything they're planning to move gets moved, and it disappears somewhere we may never recover it from. I need you to let us build this quietly. Can you do that?" I told her yes. And for 11 days, I did exactly that. I stayed at a different motel under a different name. I watched from a distance as investigators quietly subpoenaed records, traced the shell company back through 2 jurisdictions, and confirmed a scheduled transfer, a final, massive withdrawal Derek's creditors were expecting by noon on a specific Friday, the day he intended to liquidate what remained of the company's frozen assets and disappear the money before anyone could stop him. Only once that transfer was confirmed, once Agent Cho told me they had exactly what they needed and were prepared to move, did I go home. I still had a key. Derek and Chloe, in their confidence, had never bothered to change the locks, perhaps never imagined I would come back at all. I let myself in through the side door on a Thursday evening, the night before the scheduled transfer, and I found them in the kitchen. Derek at the counter scrolling through his phone, Chloe standing at the stove with her back to the door. She turned first, and the color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. "Dad," she said, and her voice cracked in a way that told me, in that instant, more than any document could have. She hadn't known, not the full truth of it. She looked at Derek with an expression I will remember for the rest of my life, confusion curdling fast into horror. Derek set his phone down slowly. "You're supposed to be in the Mediterranean," he said, his voice carefully flat. "I decided to cancel," I said, and I sat down at the kitchen table I had bought for this house 20 years earlier, and I placed a single folder on the surface in front of me, deliberately, the way you'd lay down a winning hand. "We need to talk about First National, and about a company called Sable Ridge Holdings, and about a debt you owe some very patient people who expect their money by noon tomorrow." I told them both, calmly, exactly what I knew. I did not raise my voice. I have found, over 4 decades of negotiating, that the coldest tone in a room is always the most frightening one. I watched Derek's composure crack piece by piece as I laid it out. The frozen trust, the fraudulent transition document, the gambling debts, the shell company, the offshore transfer scheduled for the following day. I watched Chloe sink into a chair across from him, her hands pressed over her mouth, asking him, again and again, if it was true, if any of it was true. He didn't deny it. Not really. He tried, for a while, to reframe it. Told me he'd only ever meant to borrow the money temporarily. Told me the company could easily absorb the losses once he found a way to pay it back. Told me none of it would have happened if I'd simply retired sooner and let him run things without looking over his shoulder. I let him talk. I wanted him to keep talking, because every word he said was a word Agent Cho's team, alerted an hour earlier that I was walking into that house, badly needed on record. They came for him the next morning, not at dawn with sirens, but quietly, 2 federal agents at the front door just after 8, the transfer he'd scheduled for noon intercepted and traced before a single dollar could move. I was there when they read him his rights. Chloe stood beside me on the porch, shaking, and when he looked at her, silently pleading with his eyes for her to say something, to do something, she said nothing at all. She turned and walked back into the house, and I have never been prouder of her than I was in that moment. The case against Derek took the better part of a year to fully unwind. It turned out he had not acted entirely alone. 2 of the board members he had personally installed had known, at minimum, that something was wrong, and had said nothing in exchange for consulting fees quietly folded into the same fraudulent structure. Agent Cho's team pursued all of it. I insisted on it. I did not want a partial reckoning. I wanted every hand that had helped hollow out 4 decades of my life held accountable. Not out of vengeance, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it, but because I understood, finally, that letting even one of them walk away untouched would only teach the next Derek that this kind of theft carries an acceptable risk. I rebuilt the company with Marion at my side as interim CFO, a position she has since made permanent at my insistence. It took 8 months to unfreeze what remained of the assets, and nearly 18 more to fully restore the fleet Derek had leveraged into near collapse. But Grady Freight Solutions is running today, profitably, honestly, under people who earned their place in it. I visited Derek once, at the federal facility where he's serving out his sentence. He looked smaller than I remembered, the easy confidence gone entirely. He asked me to help him appeal, told me the 12 years he'd been given were excessive, told me he'd made mistakes but that I, of all people, understood what desperation could do to a man. He asked me to think of Chloe, to think of what a shorter sentence would mean for her. I looked at him for a long time before I answered. I thought about every birthday I'd missed, building something I thought would matter to my family long after I was gone. I thought about the woman on the pier who had risked a stranger's disbelief to warn me. I thought about Chloe's silence on that porch, and what it had cost her to choose the truth over her own husband. You made a choice, I told him. You could have come to me. I would have helped you. Instead, you chose to burn down 41 years of my life to cover a debt you were too ashamed to admit to anyone who actually loved you. You are exactly where that choice put you. I stood up, and I did not look back before I left the room. Chloe and I are rebuilding something slower and harder than the company ever was. She calls me every Sunday now, without fail. Last week she told me she'd started keeping her own separate accounts, her own separate name on everything that matters, not out of distrust of the next man in her life, she said, but because she never wants to be blindsided again the way she was blindsided by Derek. I told her that sounded like wisdom, not fear, and that her mother, if she were still here to see the woman our daughter has become, would be every bit as proud of her as I am. Some nights I still think about that woman on the pier, Priscilla, who I never had the chance to properly thank before the ship sailed without me. I found her eventually, months later, and I made sure she understood what her 30 seconds of courage had saved. She told me she almost hadn't said anything at all, that she'd told herself it wasn't her business, that strangers don't usually want to hear hard truths from people they've never met. I think about that a lot now. How close I came to walking up that gangway and losing everything to a silence that would have cost her nothing to keep. I think about how much of what protects us in this life comes down to someone deciding, in a single ordinary moment, that a stranger's peace of mind matters more than staying quiet. If there is one thing I would ask you to carry away from my story tonight, it's this. Trust what you build, but verify what you're told, even by the people closest to you, especially by the people closest to you. Love does not require blindness. The people who truly respect you will never ask you to close your eyes and hand them the keys without question. And if you ever find yourself standing at some version of that pier, with someone grabbing your arm and telling you not to board, listen to them. Even if it's inconvenient, even if it's frightening, even if the person they're warning you about shares your name, your holidays, and your blood. I built an empire out of nothing because I refused to let fear stop me from taking chances on people. I nearly lost it because I refused, for too long, to admit that trust and evidence are not the same thing. I hope you never have to learn that lesson the way I did. But if you do, I hope you remember that it is never too late to walk back into your own life and take it back. Thank you for listening tonight. If this story meant something to you, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me about the people in your own life who taught you that love and trust have to be earned again every single day. And I will see you in the next one.